Okay, this is just a quick screencast to talk you through how to fill in the batch sheets. But what we're going to focus on are the common mistakes that students have made over the years and how you can actually avoid them, because the most common way for students to fail products is on the batch sheets and not on the products that they make. And this is eminently avoidable with a bit of preparation and a bit of care and attention in the lab. Right, so this is what the first page of your batch documents will look like. So we've got all the relevant information here to talk through. So you of course have to include the student number and date on each of your batch documents, and you definitely have to get the right product and the right amount of product that you're going to be making in the lab. And then you have to write in the reference source that you got your procedure from. And then a very common way in which students can fail is by not getting their calculations correct. So our advice to you is to do the calculations before you go into the lab, and then double check that they're correct and they're filled into this batch document correctly before you actually start the lab, and there's no harm in getting them checked. Then on the second page, this is I'd say by far and away the most common way in which students fail their products in the formulation lab, and that's putting in the batch details. It's so easy to make a mistake here, so you really have to be super conscientious and you have to double or triple check that you've done this correctly. So again, our advice is to do a bit of preparation. So the actual ingredients you're going to be using according to the monograph you're using, they can be included in before you start the lab. You can then fill in the per unit formula and then the actual final formula for the amount of the product that you're going to be making. So you can fill all of these columns in before you actually start the lab. Then when you're actually in the lab, you'll be recording the weights yourself. So you'll be filling in these three columns on the right here in the lab, and this is what you have to double check that you do correctly. So as you weigh each product, write the weight and the exact weight that you've made straight into this column here, and you have to make sure that you sign each of these. If one of these isn't signed, that's an automatic fail. And then just to reiterate that the active ingredient in your formulation, that also has to be signed off by one of the demonstrators. So not getting these weights signed off or not recording one of these weights is an instant fail, but this is an eminently avoidable mistake to make. We then go down and we input the batch details. These are provided either on the packaging for the excipients or on a laminate on the desk. Again, you can fill in some of the columns before you go in. So the actual ingredients you're using, you can fill in this column. And then when you actually get in the lab and you can see the batch details, my advice is before you even start the product, fill in the batch details nice and carefully, then check that you've done it correctly, and then when you finish making the product, check again. So double and triple checking your batch details is the best possible idea, because if you even get so much as one digit wrong here, then it's an automatic fail, and this is a really common source of failure for students. Then the third page of your batch documents is where you input your batch details for the packaging, and also where you input the method. So any packaging that actually touches your product needs to have batch details included, and that's where this section is here. We will provide the packaging details for you on a laminate in the lab. So it's the same as before. You must make sure that all of these details are written accurately in these sections, and to make sure you don't make any avoidable mistakes, just double check that you've written these correctly. It's very, very easy to drop a digit or make a tiny error that's going to give you an automatic fail. So for example, this batch number here is not written down correctly. That's an instant fail regardless of how good the product is. So once you've got all the batch details in correctly and you've double and triple checked them, then you can input the method. And what we need to say here is that you need to break the method down into steps, and you have each individual step in its own section in the method here, and it must be written down clearly in a stepwise logical order. You must make sure that all of the correct weights are included in here, and also that you use all of the correct excipients as well. It's very easy to make mistakes on these details in the method itself. And then finally, a really common source of failure is not signing each individual step as you perform it. So again, at the end of the lab, just go down that column and make sure you've actually signed every single step. If you check all of these details, you should be absolutely fine. So we've given here a nice checklist for you. So if you make sure you do this for all the products that you make, this should minimise the chances of you failing on something like the batch sheets. So double check your calculations are correct, double check that your active drug quantities are included correctly in the batch documents and they're signed by a member of staff, and also check that you've included all the other drug quantities and signed them yourself. For batch details, it's very easy to make a mistake, so we actually advise you triple check these. When you write the method, make sure that everything's in its own section, and then the really important one is make sure that you've signed every single step. And in the method, check all the weights and all the excipients you've used are actually accurate and they're the correct masses and excipients for the product you're making. If you go through this checklist, do all these things, you should be all right. Hope it helps.